Perhaps we may now hazard a guess why Scripture uses friendship so rarely as an image of the highest love. It is already, in actual fact, too spiritual to be a good symbol of spiritual things. The highest does not stand without the lowest. God can safely represent himself to us as father and husband because only a lunatic would think that he is physically our sire or that his marriage with the church is other than mystical. But if friendship were used for this purpose, we might mistake the symbol for the thing symbolized. The danger inherent in it would be aggravated. We might be further encouraged to mistake that nearness, by resemblance, to the heavenly life which friendship certainly displays for a nearness of approach. Friendship, then, like the other natural loves, is unable to save itself. In reality, because it is spiritual and therefore faces a subtler enemy, it must, even more wholeheartedly than they, invoke the divine protection if it hopes to remain sweet. For consider how narrow its true path is. It must not become what the people call a mutual admiration society, yet if it is not full of mutual admiration, of appreciative love, it is not friendship at all. For unless our lives are to be miserably impoverished, it must be for us in our friendships as it was for Christiana and her party in the Pilgrim's Progress. They seemed to be a terror one to the other, for that they could not see that glory each one on herself which they could see in each other. Now therefore they began to esteem each other better than themselves. For you are fairer than I am, said one, and you are more comely than I am, said another. There is in the long run only one way in which we can taste this illustrious experience with safety. And Bunyan has indicated it in the same passage. It was in the house of the interpreter, after they had been bathed, sealed, and freshly clothed in white raiment that the women saw one another in this light. If we remember the bathing, sealing and robing, we shall be safe. And the higher the common ground of the friendship is, the more necessary the remembrance. In an explicitly religious friendship, above all, to forget it would be fatal. For then it will seem to us that we 4 or 5 have chosen one another, the insight of each finding the intrinsic beauty of the rest, like to like, a voluntary nobility, that we have ascended above the rest of mankind by our native powers. The other loves do not invite the same illusion. Affection obviously requires kinships or at least proximities which never depended on our own choice. And as for Eros, half the love songs and half the love poems in the world will tell you that the beloved is your fate or destiny, no more your choice than a thunderbolt, for it is not in our power to love or hate. Cupid's archery, genes anything but ourselves. But in friendship, being free of all that, we think we have chosen our peers. In reality, a few years' difference in the dates of our births, a few more miles between certain houses, the choice of one university instead of another, posting to different regiments, the accident of a topic being raised or not raised at a first meeting, any of these chances might have kept us apart. But, for a Christian, there are, strictly speaking, no chances. A secret master of the ceremonies has been at work. Christ, who said to the disciples, "Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you," can truly say to every group of Christian friends, "You have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another." The friendship is not a reward for our discrimination and good taste in finding one another out. It is the instrument by which God reveals to each the beauties of all the others. They are no greater than the beauties of 1,000 other men. By friendship God opens our eyes to them. They are, like all beauties, derived from Him, and then, in a good friendship, increased by Him through the friendship itself, so that it is His instrument for creating as well as for revealing. At this feast it is He who has spread the board and it is He who has chosen the guests. It is He, we may dare to hope, who sometimes does, and always should, preside. Let us not reckon without our host. Not that we must always partake of it solemnly. God who made good laughter forbid. It is one of the difficult and delightful subtleties of life that we must deeply acknowledge certain things to be serious and yet retain the power and will to treat them often as lightly as a game. But there will be a time for saying more about this in the next chapter. For the moment I will only quote Dunbar's beautifully balanced advice. Man, please thy Maker, and be merry. And give not for this world a cherry. Chapter V. Eros. By Eros I mean of course that state which we call being in love, or, if you prefer, that kind of love which lovers are in. Some readers may have been surprised when, in an earlier chapter, I described affection as the love in which our experience seems to come closest to that of the animals. Surely, it might be asked, our sexual functions bring us equally close? This is quite true as regards human sexuality in general. But I am not going to be concerned with human sexuality simply as such. Sexuality makes part of our subject only when it becomes an ingredient in the complex state of being in love. That sexual experience can occur without eros, without being in love, and that eros includes other things besides sexual activity, I take for granted. If you prefer to put it that way, I am inquiring not into the sexuality which is common to us and the beasts or even common to all men, but into one uniquely human variation of it which develops within love what I call eros. The carnal or animally sexual element within eros, I intend, following an old usage, to call Venus. And I mean by Venus what is sexual not in some cryptic or rarefied sense such as a depth psychologist might explore, but in a perfectly obvious sense, what is known to be sexual by those who experience it, what could be proved to be sexual by the simplest observations. Sexuality may operate without eros or as part of eros. Let me hasten to add that I make the distinction simply in order to limit our inquiry and without any moral implications. I am not at all subscribing to the popular idea that it is the absence or presence of eros which makes the sexual act impure or pure, degraded or fine, unlawful or lawful. If all who lay together without being in the state of eros were abominable, we all come of tainted stock. The times and places in which marriage depends on eros are in a small minority. Most of our ancestors were married off in early youth to partners chosen by their parents on grounds that had nothing to do with eros. They went to the act with no other fuel, so to speak, than plain animal desire. And they did right, honest Christian husbands and wives, obeying their fathers and mothers, discharging to one another their marriage debt, and bringing up families in the fear of the Lord. Conversely, this act, done under the influence of a soaring and iridescent eros which reduces the role of the senses to a minor consideration, may yet be plain adultery, may involve breaking a wife's heart, deceiving a husband, betraying a friend, polluting hospitality, and deserting your children. It has not pleased God that the distinction between a sin and a duty should turn on fine feelings. This act, like any other, is justified, or not, by far more prosaic and definable criteria, by the keeping or breaking of promises, by justice or injustice, by charity or selfishness, by obedience or disobedience. My treatment rules out mere sexuality without eros on grounds that have nothing to do with morals, because it is irrelevant to our purpose. To the evolutionist eros, the human variation, will be something that grows out of Venus, a late complication and development of the immemorial biological impulse. We must not assume, however, that this is necessarily what happens within the consciousness of the individual. There may be those who have first felt mere sexual appetite for a woman and then gone on at a later stage to fall in love with her. But I doubt if this is at all common. Very often what comes first is simply a delighted preoccupation with the beloved, a general, unspecified preoccupation with her in her totality. A man in this state really hasn't leisure to think of sex. He is too busy thinking of a person. The fact that she is a woman is far less important than the fact that she is herself. He is full of desire, but the desire may not be sexually toned. If you asked him what he wanted, the true reply would often be, to go on thinking of her. He is love's contemplative. And when at a later stage the explicitly sexual element awakes, he will not feel, unless scientific theories are influencing him, that this had all along been the root of the whole matter. He is more likely to feel that the incoming tide of eros, having demolished many sand castles and made islands of many rocks, has now at last with a triumphant seventh wave flooded this part of his nature, also the little pool of ordinary sexuality which was there on his beach before the tide came in. Eros enters him like an invader, taking over and reorganizing, one by one, the institutions of a conquered country. It may have taken over many others before it reaches the sex in him, and it will reorganize that too. No one has indicated the nature of that reorganization more briefly and accurately than George Orwell, who disliked it and preferred sexuality in its native condition, uncontaminated by eros. In 1984 his dreadful hero, how much less human than the four-footed heroes of his excellent Animal Farm, before tousing the heroine, demands a reassurance. You like doing this, he asks. I don't mean simply me, I mean the thing in itself. He is not satisfied till he gets the answer, I adore it. This little dialogue defines the reorganization. Sexual desire, without eros, wants it, the thing in itself. Eros wants the beloved. The thing is a sensory pleasure, that is, an event occurring within one's own body. We use a most unfortunate idiom when we say, of a lustful man prowling the streets, that he wants a woman. Strictly speaking, a woman is just what he does not want. He wants a pleasure for which a woman happens to be the necessary piece of apparatus. How much he cares about the woman as such may be gauged by his attitude to her 5 minutes after fruition. One does not keep the carton after one has smoked the cigarettes. Now eros makes a man really want, not a woman, but one particular woman. In some mysterious but quite indisputable fashion the lover desires the beloved herself, not the pleasure she can give. No lover in the world ever sought the embraces of the woman he loved as the result of a calculation, however unconscious, that they would be more pleasurable than those of any other woman. If he raised the question he would, no doubt, expect that this would be so. But to raise it would be to step outside the world of Eros altogether. The only man I know of who ever did raise it was Lucretius, and he was certainly not in love when he did. It is interesting to note his answer. That austere voluptuary gave it as his opinion that love actually impairs sexual pleasure. The emotion was a distraction. It spoiled the cool and critical receptivity of his palate. A great poet, but Lord, what beastly fellows these Romans were. The reader will notice that Eros thus wonderfully transforms what is par excellence a need pleasure into the most appreciative of all pleasures. It is the nature of a need pleasure to show us the object solely in relation to our need, even our momentary need. But in Eros, a need, at its most intense, sees the object most intensely as a thing admirable in herself, important far beyond her relation to the lover's need. If we had not all experienced this, if we were mere logicians, we might boggle at the conception of desiring a human being, as distinct from desiring any pleasure, comfort, or service that human being can give. And it is certainly hard to explain. Lovers themselves are trying to express part of it, not much, when they say they would like to eat one another. Milton has expressed more when he fancies angelic creatures with bodies made of light who can achieve total interpenetration instead of our mere embraces. Charles Williams has said something of it in the words, "Love you? I am you." Without Eros, sexual desire, like every other desire, is a fact about ourselves. Within Eros it is rather about the beloved. It becomes almost a mode of perception, entirely a mode of expression. It feels objective, something outside us, in the real world. That is why Eros, though the king of pleasures, always, at his height, has the air of regarding pleasure as a byproduct. To think about it would plunge us back in ourselves, in our own nervous system. It would kill Eros, as you can kill the finest mountain prospect by locating it all in your own retina and optic nerves. Anyway, whose pleasure? For one of the first things Eros does is to obliterate the distinction between giving and receiving. Hitherto I have been trying merely to describe, not to evaluate. But certain moral questions now inevitably arise, and I must not conceal my own view of them. It is submitted rather than asserted, and of course open to correction by better men, better lovers, and better Christians. It has been widely held in the past, and is perhaps held by many unsophisticated people today, that the spiritual danger of Eros arises almost entirely from the carnal element within it, that Eros is noblest or purest when Venus is reduced to the minimum. The older moral theologians certainly seem to have thought that the danger we chiefly had to guard against in marriage was that of a soul-destroying surrender to the senses. It will be noticed, however, that this is not the scriptural approach. St. Paul, dissuading his converts from marriage, says nothing about that side of the matter except to discourage prolonged abstinence from Venus, Icor 7:5. What he fears is preoccupation, the need of constantly pleasing that is, considering one's partner, the multiple distractions of domesticity. It is marriage itself, not the marriage bed, that will be likely to hinder us from waiting uninterruptedly on God. And surely St. Paul is right? If I may trust my own experience, it is, within marriage as without, the practical and prudential cares of this world, and even the smallest and most prosaic of those cares, that are the great distraction. The gnat-like cloud of petty anxieties and decisions about the conduct of the next hour have interfered with my prayers more often than any passion or appetite whatever. The great, permanent temptation of marriage is not to sensuality but, quite bluntly, to avarice. With all proper respect to the medieval guides, I cannot help remembering that they were all celibates, and probably did not know what Eros does to our sexuality, how, far from aggravating, he reduces the nagging and addictive character of mere appetite. And that not simply by satisfying it. Eros, without diminishing desire, makes abstinence easier. He tends, no doubt, to a preoccupation with the beloved which can indeed be an obstacle to the spiritual life, but not chiefly a sensual preoccupation. The real spiritual danger in Eros as a whole lies, I believe, elsewhere. I will return to the point. For the moment, I want to speak of the danger which at present, in my opinion, especially haunts the act of love. This is a subject on which I disagree, not with the human race, far from it, but with many of its gravest spokesmen. I believe we are all being encouraged to take Venus too seriously, at any rate, with the wrong kind of seriousness. All my life a ludicrous and portentous solemnization of sex has been going on. One author tells us that Venus should recur through the married life in a solemn, Sacramental rhythm.